day everyone, welcome you back to our channel, which is Literary Academy, where we always dive deep into the world of literature. Last week we examined what literature is, and our previous class before last week, we also examined the difference between English literature and literature in English. So this week we want to unravel the intricacy of what we call figures of speech in literature in English. And these figures of speech, how do we use them? What do we use them for in literature in English? These are group of words, because we're having many of them in literature in English. So these are figures of these are group of words in literature in English we use to add depth to our literary work. We also use it to make our literary work more beautiful than the other aspects of the subject we offer in school. So figures of speech are words we use in adding aesthetic, which is beauty, to literary work, be it drama, be it prose, be it poetry. So we use them to add beauty to our work. And we discover these figures of speech are used in all aspects of literature. So we use it to add beauty to our work. So let's move on today. As I've said earlier, we use these figures of speech to add aesthetic, to add depth, to our what? To our literary work. So let's take them one after the other and see the figures of speech we have in literature in English. We can't finish them today, but wherever we stop here today, we'll continue from where we stop here today in our next class, which is next week Saturday. So the first figures of speech, which every one of us is familiar with, the first one we always teach in school, we always discuss, that is very, very that's very, very common in our society, is simile. And I hope every one of us know what this is. So let's take it from there and see what simile is. Number one, our first figures of speech we are discussing today is simile. As I've said earlier, simile. Now, what is simile? Simile in literature has to do with a vivid comparison of two things with the use of as and like. When we are comparing two things of equal part, we are comparing them in literary, it might not even be of equal part. So when we compare two things in literary work, that is when we have simile. Then when we are comparing these figures of speech in literary work, we use two words which are very, very common in our society. These two words are as and like. We still have more, but the one we use most are has and like. As and like. This is a vivid comparison of two things, as I've said earlier, is a comparison of two things with the use of as and like. Now, when we take an example of this, you understand better. It has to do with when we are comparing two things. You are comparing two objects, a human being and another object or whatsoever, then we are trying to compare them indirectly. Now, this is where we are going. It has to do with an indirect comparison. When you are comparing things indirectly, when you are not being direct, why making comparison between two things? That is when we have our simile. Now, let's take for instance. Now, let's move on first. It has to do with, so it has to do with an indirect comparison of two things. That is when you are comparing two things indirectly. Now, let's take a look at an example of this for better clarification. Example, I want to look at example of simile. She is as dark as charcoal. Now look at this statement now. You discover from the definition I gave, the definition of simile I just gave, you discover we are trying to compare this, she, a person, a female person. It can be, we might be talking about a person which name is Roima, which name is Amana, which name is Jumoke, or whatsoever. So we are trying to compare this person with this object. We are trying to tell us how dark the person is. We are now taking it indirectly. That is simile. When you are comparing two objects indirectly, then we have simile with the use of what? As or like. Now let's take another example using like. We've used as. So don't forget, I said we compare two things with the use of this or this. You can see there are more words we use in comparison, but these are the two we are dealing with today. Now, they are acting like a good actor. Now look at this sentence too. We are trying to compare two things with this. Now, what are we comparing here? We are trying to compare group of people here with a good actor. That is simile. When we are trying to compare two things with the use of this and more of them. Now, that is simile. Now, let's move to another figures of speech, which is metaphor. This is also one of the familiar figures of speech in literature. Metaphor. We are taking metaphor after simile. We are taking it after simile because they are like word and opposite. They are opposite words. One, which is simile, the first one, which is simile, is an indirect comparison when we are trying to compare an object, two objects indirectly. While this is a direct comparison. That is just the difference between the two. One is indirect, the other one is direct. So simile is metaphor is a direct comparison. Now here, because it is a direct comparison, we are not comparing with anything. We are not using any word in the comparison. There is no use of as, there is no use of like. Because it is direct, we take the two objects directly, compare them directly. Now let's write the definition for the example. This is a direct comparison. Here we compare directly, comparison of two things in English language. Here we compare directly. So let's take a look at an example. Example of metaphor. Now I said the other time they are just opposite words. One is direct, the other one is indirect. This is indirect simile. This is direct metaphor. We are trying to take them again over and over again for a better clarification so that you know the difference between the two before we move to another one. Now, example. Now, let's take a look at this. Rage is a destroyer. Here, we are comparing two things here too. We are comparing rage. Now, what is even the meaning of rage? The meaning of rage is anger. When we're talking about rage here, we mean anger. Now, we are not saying that anger, which is this, rage, is a destroyer. Comparing two things, comparing this and this directly, without the use of any other thing. We are taking them directly. We are telling us here that this, when you allow it in one's life, it may destroy people's life. That is the meaning of this. You can see from the example here, we are trying to compare this, rage, and destroyer, which is telling us that if you allow this, which I call the meaning of this, is what? Anger. When you allow anger in one's life, it will be a destroyer in one's life. It will destroy people's happiness, destroy people's joy. So that is simile and metaphor. When we are talking about simile and metaphor in literary work, we are trying to what? We mean two opposite words. One is a direct comparison. The other one is an indirect comparison. Simile is an indirect comparison, while metaphor is a direct comparison. So that is the difference between simile and metaphor. Now we are now moving to the next figures of speech. Now we are taking oxymoron next. This is also part of our figures of speech in literature in English. Then how do we explain this? How do we identify this, which is oxymoron, in what? In literary work? Or when we come across it, we might have been coming across this in different books we've read in the past. But because we don't know the meaning, since we don't know the meaning, we find it difficult to be able to cite an example. So because of that, we won't even know this is metaphor, this is simile, or whatsoever. So talking about oxymoron, we are talking about an act. This is an act of placing two contradictory words side by side. Now, oxymoron is an art of placing two words that contradict side by side. When we are placing two words that contradict each other in any literary work, that is when we have oxymoron. Let's take for instance now, you are taking a good thing and a bad thing, you are now placing them beside each other in a line of poetry or in any work of art. It can even be in prose or whatsoever. Then that is when we have oxymoron. Let's take an example. Now, let's look at this example. Women are necessary evil. Now, let's look at these two words. If you look at these two words, we are saying women in our society, they are necessary. And at the same time, they are evil. Now, what we call necessary, we also call it evil. That is an oxymoron when we are placing two words that contradict. It means, yeah. Now, don't forget, in literary work, we use this to express deeper meaning. Deeper meaning. We use figures of speech in literature to express deeper meaning. Meaning that is beyond surface meaning. Now, if you look at this now, the interpretation means women in our society, they are very, very important. And at the same time, maybe due to some behavior they used to exhibit, people might see them as evil, but we can't do without them. Now, another example of oxymoron is this. The play is tragic comedy. Now, let's take a look at this too. We are placing this and this side by side, and they are two opposite words. The same thing happened here. Opposite word, we place them side by side, but they mean a lot. Now let's take a look at this, the meaning of this. The play, in literature, there's what we call tragedy. It has to do with a play that starts sadly and ends sadly. Why comedy? A play that starts happily and ends happily. So we are comparing the two. We are placing the two side by side. Something that has to do with sadness and something that has to do with happiness. And if we even look at this, we're even having this again as one of the types of comedy. Sorry, one of the types of drama in literature again, tragic comedy. It has to do with the mixture of happiness and sadness. So when we are trying to place two opposite words side by side in literary work, that is when we have oxymoron. So if you're having more example, you can comment on the comment section so as to learn together and gain more. Now we are moving to the fourth one, which is synecdoche. People do call it synecdoche. It is not synecdoche. The correct pronunciation is synecdoche. It looks like synecdoche, but not synecdoche. It is synecdoche. Now let's write the meaning before the explanation. This is an act of using a part, to represent a whole. This is an act of using part of someone, part of human being, part of things to represent the whole thing. Let's take for example, we are human being. Now, so we want to use part of me here or part of anybody around here to represent the whole person, to represent human being. That is when we have synecdoche. Now let's take an example. Examples. Example 1. We have example 1. All tongue must confess. Look at it. All tongue must confess. The tongue here does not mean a normal tongue. We are using this tongue because it is part of human being. Tongue is part of human being attributes. So when we are now using part of human being to represent every aspect of the human being, that's when we have synecdoche. We are using this tongue here to represent human being, which means all human beings must confess to whatever they see. That is synecdoche. When we are using a part of something to represent all that particular thing, that is synecdoche. Sinedoki rather. Now, another example. All heads must bow. All heads must. Let's take for instance, we are all inside discussing. Let's say for instance, we are up to 15 or 100. Any number can be 1,000 inside or outside a particular place. Now, we now see a person, let's say a king, coming. Now, a person among us now say a king is coming. In that wise, all heads must bow for the king. Does that mean we are bowing? Does that mean we want to cut off our head and use it to respect the king? No, we are not bowing our head. It means everybody must greet the king by bowing down the head. Now, we've been able to explain simile, metaphor, synecdoche, and oxymoron. So we've explained 4 of the figures of speech. Now let's move to the 5th one. The 5th one we are taking today is personification. Now, personification has to do with when you are giving human attributes, what human being does, what we do as human being. We are now giving the characteristics, we are giving the attributes of human being to an inanimate being. Now, let's try the definition, the meaning of personification here. This is an act of giving human attributes to an inanimate being. It is an act of giving what I can do, what you can do as a person, as a living thing, to an inanimate being, to what is not a living thing. That is what we call personification. When we are giving what I perform as an action, or what human being can do, can perform as an action, to inanimate being, to things that are not what human being, to things that are not what, that are not living things. That is when we have personification. Now let's take a look at an example of personification. Now this is even common among us in the society. In this country, it is very, very common among us. You are walking while it is raining, your mom or your dad call you, "Mom, please, I'll soon be home." Even as I'm coming home presently, rain is beating me. Everybody knows that this attribute is human being attribute. It is human being that beat. Rain can't beat. It can't beat because it's not human being. It's not even having hand or leg or hand. To what? To beat. So giving the attribute of human being to this, which is an inanimate being, that is when we have personification. Wherever you come across this type of sentence in any of the literary works, then you are having personification like that. You come across this, it might not be rain is beating me, but when you discover a sentence you just read, in a particular sentence you just read, you discover that human being attribute is being given to an inanimate being. That is when we have personification. Now, another example. My shoe is smiling at me. Maybe because you just bought the shoe or the sandal or whatsoever, it is shining, and now tell your mom, my mom, look at how beautiful my shoe is. It is even smiling at me. So it is human being that smile. Shoe can't smile. So we are only taking this to what? To express deeper meaning in literary work. So that is that about personification. Now let's take another figures of speech. Number 6. We are taking euphemism. This is another figures of speech. This is the 6th one we are taking today. Euphemism. What is euphemism? Euphemism is, let's write, it is when, euphemism is when an unpleasant thing is said in a pleasant manner. This is when you are saying an unpleasant thing in a pleasant manner. In fact, this euphemism is very, very common among the Yorubas. Let me even say in Nigeria culture. Let's take for instance, we're having a king that just died. Yoruba people believe that you don't say, due to the respect we always accord to our words, to our king, because we see them as the second in command to God. So they don't always say our king is dead. What do they say? They say the king has gone to the land of unknown. That is an euphemism. When you are saying an unpleasant thing, everybody knows that the king is dead. But because we don't want to present it in an unpleasant manner, it is an unpleasant thing when we're having our king die. But we don't want to say it in that way. We don't want to present it in an unpleasant manner. Then we say the king has gone to the world of unknown. That is when we have euphemism in any literary work. Let's take a look at it. Gone to the land of unknown. Some people will even say the king has joined his ancestors. This is even very common among the Yorubas. Our king has joined his ancestors. So if you look at the surface meaning, people will even think maybe the king has traveled to maybe some people, maybe people that are older than him, maybe people that he wants to go and learn from. Maybe the king has traveled to those people to learn some one or two things. No, it means the literal meaning means that the king is dead. So this euphemism is when we are trying to say an unpleasant thing, things that is not pleasant, things that has to do with sadness in a happy way. That is when we have euphemism in literary work. That's when we have euphemism. Or we can even say the woman has kicked the bucket. This also means the woman is dead. But because we don't want to present it in an unpleasant way, in an unpleasant manner, then we decide to present it in a pleasant manner. That is euphemism. For better clarification, personification has to do with an act of giving human attribute to an inanimate being. These are the examples here. Euphemism has to do with when we say an unpleasant thing in a pleasant thing in a pleasant manner. And you can see from the example we have here under personification, the rain is beating me. The example we have here, another example we have here under personification, my shoe is smiling at me, which we all know are attributes of human being given to inanimate being. Now, look at the feminism. The king has gone to the land of unknown, or the king has joined his ancestors. All these are unpleasant things that are being addressed in a pleasant manner. The same thing, look at this one. The woman has kicked the bucket. It means the woman is dead. But because you don't want to present it that way, then we try to present it in a pleasant manner. So today, we are stopping here today. Number 6. We stop in number 6. So if you are having more examples of each of the figures of speech we've discussed today, you can just comment on the comment section. It will be of benefit to me. It will be of benefit to other people in the society as well. Because no one is an island of knowledge. We still have more examples of this. I can still give more examples of this, but because of time, we have to take it two. So if you know you're having more examples, because I believe I'm still having people out there that are better than me, that are having more examples of this offhand. If you're having it, just comment on the comment section. Let it be useful to me and other people in the society. So this marks the end of our class. For this class to be able to be moving on every week, week in, week out, we would like you to what? We'll like you to share to share whatever we are posting on our channel every time. Comment and share. Please. And most importantly, subscribe. Thank you.